Welcome to the Bite Pod, where we dive into the latest insights on trade compliance, export control, and supply chain risk management. Each month, we bring you conversations with industry experts, thought leaders, and professionals on the front lines of global trade. Whether you're a compliance professional, a business owner, or just curious about how trade impacts our daily lives, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Anne Riitho. Today, I'm joined by Bite CEO Thariq and William Jansen from SEKO Logistics. Thank you both for being here. So just jumping in, William, if you want to kick us off, give us a little bit of background about yourself, how you got into customs brokerage, what your career has looked like, and just introduce our listeners to you and your career.
And thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to talk to you guys about my background and some of the changes in the customs brokerage industry. I am currently the director of Customs Brokerage and Account Management for Ecommerce at SEKO Logistics. My background in the industry has taken a couple twists and turns on both the freight forwarding and customs brokerage side, starting at working in a warehouse managing filing, which was supposed to last 2 weeks and has gone much longer. It's worth noting my getting into customs brokerage was due to my mother being in the industry, and I feel like it's been much longer. I can remember looking at certain trading cards as a kid and her explaining to me how they're actually cheaper because they're gray market goods and not knockoffs, things like that. So I started in filing, working through, and then worked into several roles.
That's a great intro, William. And just for the folks listening in, William and I met at the National Customs Brokerage and Freight Forwarders Association out in Florida in March. And we had a great discussion around some of the tools and tech that the industry is looking at. And, I was really impressed with William's take on technology and kind of being forward-leaning in the industry. So yeah, really great to have you on, and looking forward to hearing more. Back over to you, Anne.
Yeah, great. Thanks, William. And great to hear your history and kind of that you fell into it. I feel like I've had similar experiences actually with Bite, so some shared ground there. Just looking a little bit deeper at customs brokers in general, and what are the different career paths that customs brokers can take? So for anyone who's looking to get into the industry, what does that look like in terms of paths that are available?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting talking about the paths because everyone is at a different starting point. Like you guys say, this is an industry where it's common to fall into. I think when you look at customs brokers, a lot of people consider there to be two different paths, where they compare going into trade compliance, working on the corporate side, working for an importer exporter, and practicing, the knowledge that they have, versus working for a service provider. And I definitely could see how there are different skill sets needed for each one, but they're becoming more and more similar, being that both have many specializations. So what I love in this industry is that you have to become an expert at becoming an expert, and where your clients or your employers' requirements are, that's where your knowledge needs to be. On the customs brokerage side for service providers, we see, several different types of specialization where you look at things at commodity level. For example, apparel importers oftentimes have very, very heavy data requirements where they want to see data at a SKU level, both for duty, tariff classification, things like that. On the other hand, you'll see brokers that become super specialized in personal effects, where there is a wide variety of what someone might be bringing with them when they're moving abroad, anything from alcohol to furniture and things like that. The other interesting part about the brokerage side is there are other specializations that don't require actually filing an entry for an import into the U.S. we see customs brokers that specialize in reconciliation, where they're going back and helping importers reconcile their values declared going back 21 months. And not many brokers could do things like that, or duty drawback, where brokers are really just ending up in a very specific area. So I think that between the number of commodities and the number of things imported, plus the number of services needed to be a compliance importer, there's quite a few career paths to specialize in, and I think that's one of the best things about the industry.
And that's super interesting. As I hear you talk, I kind of think about like the tax code and tax prep and tax accounting, and how, there's small business, there's large business, there's like all these different codes. And then it reminds me of, the tax code and the customs broker's book. How big is that? How big is that book you have to read to take the exam, William?
I like to call it the only book you can kill a man with. That's the tariff schedule. It's when I took the exam, I had the Code of Federal Regulations, the CFR for customs, as well as the tariff schedule, and had to be at least 30 or 40 pound crate I was rolling around. It's quite large. I think they're electronic now. They're letting people take the exam electronically, but I'm grateful that I had to flip through those and get some paper cuts, because I think you learn a few things that way.
Yeah, it sounds like you bring great knowledge and experience to the role that you're currently in. Kind of looking back, like you said, I mean, paper to electronic, but in general, like across customs brokerage, what have you seen as like the most notable trends in the last 2 years, 5 years? What does that look like? How have things changed?
I have been going back to a comment, I believe, made by Customs Executive Director of Trade Policy, Brandon Lord, in March at Customs, their trade summit in Philadelphia. And he made a comment along the lines of customs work is changing to asking what's in the box and how much does it cost, to how was it made? And to me, where the industry is going from customs brokerage and customs compliance is fitting that mold. Understanding that there are requirements that go far beyond the finished, far, I guess, prior to the finished product. Anti-dumping comes to mind, where you're looking at like aluminum extrusions, where based on how those extrusions were made or where they were made, regardless of what the finished product is, customs duties, additional duties might apply. It might be a priority issue. And then, of course, the elephant in the room with that statement is forced labor, where importers are being put in a spot where they have to go from the raw materials of the product, whether that's cotton or tomatoes or quartzite, and tracking that through the finished goods and being able to have reasonable care and control whether that is complying with those laws. So how is the customs brokerage industry changing? To me, we're trying to figure out how to manage that data to enable trade in a compliant way, and it hasn't been super easy.
No, doesn't sound like a simple task. I give you a lot of credit. Kind of going along the same lines to that effect, are there any key groups or organizations or like main resources that you see supporting customs brokers or the broader trade community? Like how are people getting this information and the support that they need to adapt to these changing trends?
Yeah, the National Customs Brokers and Freight Forwarders Association works absolutely tirelessly to support customs brokers, and that comes from trying to understand how changes in policy affects brokers, but also how those changes in policies can facilitate trade, where the visibility they have of what is going on for customs priorities. They allow brokers to stand up and talk through how it affects our clients and really have a finger on the pulse of those issues. So that has been the nice thing about the NCBFAA is that they have local representation at just about every port, where they have a community that's working locally and then prioritizing that at a national level. On top of that, unfortunately, they're exclusive to service providers, but the International Compliance Professionals Association has been extremely helpful of a community of trade practitioners that are willing to help each other and share the knowledge. So I don't think that there is an organization that someone in this industry can participate in that's negative, right? We work with niche issues that you're not going to be able to get help from people walking down the street. They don't understand the requirements that we're trying, the problems that we're trying to solve. So being able to be around people just talking about their problems, and there's no alcohol involved, I think is really good for anyone in this industry. That's how good ideas come about without the booze.
Yeah, and that's the last year at Byte, a lot of what we've been doing is learning about the industry, and that NCBFAA conference last April was kind of the first time I encountered many people in the industry. Having come from the enforcement space primarily with ICE and HSI, and supporting that to kind of looking closer at the brokers, freight forwarders, and people in the supply chain industry. Just amazed at how much you have to think on your feet and how things change a lot. And yeah, no, it was during the day. That disco party was pretty crazy though, William, I have to admit, at the conference.
It was. I'll have a better costume for next year. Hopefully it won't be the same thing.
So, William, you've mentioned data a few times, and I'm just wondering for you, and with the increasing availability of data and the rise of AI-driven tools, how do you see technology influencing the customs brokerage industry and trade compliance as a whole moving forward?
Yeah, so for the use of AI tools, where this started, to be expected in the customs brokerage industry, was how to use AI to eliminate or minimize data entry. So there were several very effective companies that are offering solutions where they were able to take a data set, extrapolate from a PDF or Excel commercial invoice or packing list, and put that in a format where it can be used in a customs brokerage software or be used in a duty drawback solution and things like that. This area of service providers had some drama within the last year over a ruling that was issued by Customs, I believe at the end of last year, sort of known as the infamous automation ruling in the customs brokerage industry. I think that a lot of people took this ruling and read the result and not too much into the details and the whys. So I think it's important to take a step back. The ruling was looking for advice on whether a unlicensed third party, so an outside company that was offshore, was able to take commercial invoices and packing lists and manually extrapolate that data to put in a format for customs entries. The ruling identified two sort of issues with that scenario, being that the party was unlicensed. In that case, they couldn't be licensed because they were offshore, and that the data that they were providing was confidential, right? Because customs brokers have a requirement to keep their data confidential, that the importer's data confidential. There's obviously some workarounds here. Companies, I think the issue of confidentiality is easier. A lot of brokers have clauses, a lot of importers have clauses in their POAs that do allow for data to be shared with certain parties that are identified. The interesting part was the unlicensed aspect. So in that particular ruling, there was basically an outsourced staffing company that was doing the entry. And based on the language in the ruling, the question arises, well, if a third-party AI company, an AI software, was the one or the artificial one that's extrapolating the data, do they have to be licensed? And I think that there still is some question around this. I know some of these companies are working on getting their license. I don't think that that's the way forward. It's to me, this is still a tool, and how do we allow for customs brokers to use that tool? And speaking with Customs, they've sort of made comments that the focus should be around the role of the broker Is there a licensed customs broker at the end of that data set that's validating and things like that, validating before they push the button, which makes sense. It's, you can't have an industry going backwards against this. It's just going to cause issues other places. So I think that that's where we'll see a lot of the automation and efficiency come in, where brokers are able to file more entries with the same individuals, and allow those people to focus on being better brokers and not being better at data entry. And I think that, there's a lot of excitement there to do that, to elevate the quality at the desk level of brokers. The other piece where technology is really being used in the industry, and where I'm following even more closely, is how do we leverage data to help facilitate compliant supply chains. And I think what's really interesting is when you look at some of the largest points of emphasis for the government, things like forced labor, export compliance screening, narcotics, trafficking, technologies like Byte are really fascinating because they can take that same process of looking at an organization and that same thought process of understanding their ownership and their overall where they sit in the global economy, and leverage the data to make inferences and identify risk. So I think it's really fascinating. When you think about going back, when I started in the industry, I thought what it meant to have a supply chain without forced labor meant going and auditing the factories. Or when I looked at export compliance screening, you look at understanding, going and figuring out what the end use actually was, going and seeing the product that used at the destination. And likewise for narcotics screening, you would look at what's in the box. But really, as international trade exploded, so did data. And using these technologies, you can take a similar approach to solve multiple problems. And I think that's super fascinating.
That's an excellent answer, and really sheds light onto those two key areas, William. Really interesting and insightful. And I have a lot of respect over the past 12 years into the just complexities, and how there's a balance between excessive compliance and trying to continue to push product or continue to do your job. And I hope that the tools can kind of help people get to that middle ground where you're compliant, but you still you want to do the right thing, but you're also making viable business decisions and continuing to automate your processes.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we're not here to put up fences. We're here to figure out how to put up gates, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
Great. So we're almost to the end of our time here, William, but just again, looking back at this conversation, you've offered us so much insight and so much to think about. Do you have any final thoughts or advice for brokers or professionals navigating, all the changes that are occurring in international trade, and just any final thoughts that you have, we'd love to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing in this industry is getting easier. We are seeing more and more external factors, whether that's, competition, whether that's political, or our own organizations having their own goals that are creating more and more issues. And I think that as trade professionals, we should be leaning into that and accepting that challenge. I think for me, the advice that I like to give people is to not be afraid to specialize. So many people are worried about pigeonholing themselves, but based on how quick this industry moves, it's not going to be long until you have an opportunity to specialize in something else. And I think that these issues are not unique to a certain industry, certain organization, or even an industry. So I think that specialization is good. And in terms of staying up to date, you've got to get involved in these different associations and international trade groups. Like I said, I don't think there's any that are doing bad work. And they all are understaffed and need more help. So that is a great place for visibility, and that's where I encourage, folks to go.
Awesome. Yeah, no, thanks a lot. Really appreciated you being on, William. Looking forward to seeing you next year at the on the conference tour. And yeah, it's been super having you on today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
And that wraps up our Bite Pod for this month, and we look forward to our next expert next month. Have a great afternoon to both of you. Thanks so much for being on.
Thanks, Anne.